Well, I'll tell you what I'm really interested in right now, using the wilderness as medicine, being as connected as possible to the landscape that you're in. That means taking your shoes off on the gravel bar and on the sandbar and walking through the creek as much as you can, dunking your face in the creek, and treat that sunshine and that clean water and that view, that long view of pure wilderness as medicine for you.
Welcome to The Trail Less Traveled, an adventure radio series and podcast dedicated to collecting stories and sounds from around the world in order to take you back to mankind's earliest form of entertainment, storytelling. Missoula, Montana is a mecca for outdoor enthusiasts, and each week we will bring you tales of adventure from both near and far, as well as information and inspiration and a few tunes to set the mood. You can subscribe to the podcast and learn about our international outreach projects at traillesstraveled.net. And now, here's your host, international expedition guide, conservationist, and yogi, Mandela.
Today, The Trail Less Traveled is being recorded in a U-Haul van just outside departures at the Fairbanks International Airport, and I'm sitting here with Clint Fries. He has been guiding since 1992. The rivers that he has been guiding on quite a lot include the Alsec, the Hulahula, and the Upano. He also has spent quite a lot of time on the Nenana and the Rio Grande. He's a father, a builder, and an explorer. First and foremost, Clint, thank you so much for letting me record this interview with you on your phone, because mine went into the Hulahula recently and is not working.
It's my pleasure, Mandela. Thank you for doing it.
You know, I've recorded interviews in a lot of different spots, but this is the first time I've been in a U-Haul right outside of an airport, so I'm stoked to jump right in. My first question for you is, where did you grow up, and how was adventure a part of your childhood?
Oh, nice. I grew up in Washington, D.C., actually, and my dad worked for the U.S. Agency for International Development, which has recently been gutted. And he was an outdoorsman in his free time, not in his daily life, but anytime he could, he was taking me out skiing and hiking and climbing and rafting and canoeing. And so we went on some adventures, even some fly-out trips. You know, I got to go on the Boundary Waters with him and the Allagash Waterway, week-long canoeing trips in my, teens. So just cherished those times, and he sparked that, I think, that sense of what true wilderness is, which a lot of us don't even really get to see what that is. Certainly not in our younger days. So that was special. And then at the same time, I was going to this wilderness camp every summer for about a month at a time. And so I just got really hooked into the wilds and just poking around in the creek, and hiking around in the woods with a bunch of other kids. And so that was formative for me. And I feel like a lot in my life was to try to recreate that experience, From there, I went to college in Indiana and met a guy who had a friend down on the Rio Grande. And that year I decided to go, I was a ceramics and religion major, actually. And so I decided to go to the desert Southwest on my spring break and try to visit the pueblos and try to learn some things about their pottery, because I was very influenced by their stuff. And I did that. And along the way, I stopped down at the Rio Grande and went down Santa Elena Canyon. And I was sure this was it. This is what I wanted to do. I had been on some trips and been, wowed by the guides and thought they were so cool. And so I went back, finished school, came back in June down to Big Bend National Park. And it's, 115 degrees there in June. So most of the good guides had left for Colorado, which left a lot of space for the young and the dumb like me to get out there and push on the oars and learn stuff. And it was a great place for me because it wasn't just whitewater. There was a lot of interp, multi-day experience right off the bat. And so that hooked me in. At the time I thought maybe this is just a summer deal or 2 summers. Didn't never really imagine it'd be a career, but I think that multi-day thing, and they just kept growing. And a couple years after that, I found Alaska, and just grew and grew and grew. Fell in love with Alaska. And 95, I was living in a school bus on an airstrip in Alaska, running the Nenana, and did that for a few years. And one day the phone rang, and it was Alaska Discovery on the phone. They needed a last-minute guide to go up and run the Sheenjack River on the south side of the Brooks Range in Alaska. And I managed to get the time off, and I jumped out up there, and that was my first taste of, the alpine tundra and the Arctic. And, I just couldn't get enough and kept going back as many trips as I could for the next 20 years. There's something about it up there. I'm heading out there tomorrow, and I'm really excited. And I don't take it for granted. I may never get back there again, It's a rare opportunity. It's a very difficult place to access and a difficult place to pass through. So I'm really excited about it. And for me, that aspect of being an explorer is a big part of it. My dad was big into sea shanties and maritime folk songs and stuff, and some incredible songs about the Northwest Passage and trying to find the passage. And so for me to see the Arctic Ocean was a big deal. And it still is, It's even, we go on these trips and that's the plan, is that we're going to end up at the Arctic Ocean. But man, it seems like it's 1 out of 4 that we actually make it. So yeah, not taking it for granted and really hoping to get out there again. Feels like you're on another world, and it's flat. You can see forever. There's a lot of optical illusions and whale bones and ice, and the thought, at least, and sometimes the tracks of polar bears that are cruising around out there, and the mist, and it's just otherworldly. So I'm pretty excited, really excited to be out here again. Gonna go do it again with a good time old friend that I've been working with for 30 years. So very grateful today to be heading out there again. I think, we can't all be the first explorers, right? But we can still be explorers. And you can still have that feeling when you're cruising without power northbound towards the Arctic Ocean, in that vastness and that silence, and you're not seeing other people. You can still have that feeling. And I love that.
I feel like this is a good time to talk about some of your mentors along the way.
Yeah, I've just been incredibly fortunate with mentors too. And it did start down there in Big Bend. And some of those people are still with me. And tomorrow I'll be on the river with my friend Thirsty, who I met down there in Big Bend, and our mutual friends along the way. Bob Gray is one in particular. But all those years in Denali, one thing that I have found that it's difficult to replace in other work that I do is that level of excellence. When you're working with other guides, and the level of excellence that everybody is operating at is so high that you don't have to talk much about what's about to happen. And you got each other's back, like, unconditionally. And I don't find that in much of the other, construction jobs that I do or other work that I do. You really have to talk everything out, or there's always confusion, and people don't have that sort of high esteem of each other that sometimes I've felt in the guiding world. So yeah, I really love that. And yeah, I just lost a mentor actually just a month ago down there in Texas, the guy who got me down there. And I think about him a lot. He was an intense guy. Talking to him was like being in therapy at all times. And he was in your business, but in the most loving way. And, I miss him. I wish we had more time to talk. But yeah, time is rolling on, and I'm grateful to still be going down the river. I still feel pretty capable at it, but I know I'm at the end of my career too. And I'm seeing some of my colleagues, my mentors, give it up and go to private boating, which is, that's a great retirement plan. That's what I'm hoping for too. But I also just happened to, get involved with Mountain Travel Sobek, which is a company of legends, a company of mentors. And I didn't intend that. I remember looking at Mountain Travel's itineraries and poaching some of their itineraries well before I ever worked for them, because they were always doing the coolest stuff. And I was working for Alaska Discovery at the time when they got swallowed up by Mountain Travel, which was fortunate for me and opened up some doors internationally and nationally. And that was great. But I feel honored to be, a part of it. I feel like, times are changing, and there's fewer and fewer people that want to come out here and do something like this that's so variable that you might have a fantastic time, or the elements might be against you, and you may suffer. And the pool of people that want to do that is small, and so the adventure trips that are being offered tend to be softer and softer. But Sobek is still holding out on some of these true adventure trips, and man, I'm just so grateful that they are.
So Clint, since you're going to be here tomorrow, not in this area because I'm getting in the big plane, you're going to get in the smaller plane. Can you paint the picture for guides who are listening? And also for someone who doesn't have a whitewater background and just paint the picture of what this expedition is going to be like on the Hulahula. And then I'm hoping that maybe we can come back and talk about the Alsec if we have time.
Nice.
But for me, coming up here, one of the things that blew my mind the most is, sure, I have a background in multi-day whitewater trips, but the logistics of airplanes that come into play in Alaska to me is just so beautiful and challenging.
Yeah, it is challenging, and I love that part of it too. I love these old planes. So tomorrow we're going to meet up at the air service at 7:30, and at 8:30 we'll board a 9-passenger plane. There's only 5 of us and our gear, and we'll fly an hour and a half or so north to Arctic Village, just north of the Arctic Circle. And then we'll transfer to bush planes, these cool Helio Courier planes from the 70s, the early 70s. And they can land in the shortest spaces and take off in the shortest spaces. And that's what we'll be doing. They'll be taking us in and dropping us off in this little gravel bar. We're going to fly up over the range, the Brooks Range, and drop into Grassers. And they'll put us down on the gravel bar and fly away. And we're going to spend the next 12 days heading out to the Arctic Ocean, hopefully. There's a lot of ifs before you can really commit to even trying to get out all that way. It's 83 miles, and it gets progressively harder the further you go, the last few miles being particularly difficult. But we'll spend the first week or so poking through the mountains and doing lots of hikes, lots of layover camps, hoping to get in the middle of the caribou migration. The porcupine caribou herd, numbering 200,000 animals, is coming through there one way or another. We're taking our best bets to be in there at the right timing to see them. And their associated predators, the bears and wolves and stuff, hopefully will be around too. Wolverines, some great birds, and incredible wildflowers. Just a sea of wildflowers. And nothing is very tall. It's all very low right along the ground. There's no trees on the north side. So you can just see forever and you can walk forever. So some fantastic hiking and good tundra napping. We like to hike up a certain ways and have a picnic lunch and then take a tundra nap and then hike up a bit further before coming back to camp. So ideally, we'll make a decision towards the end, days 6 or 7. We're going to decide, okay, we're going to try to make it out to the ocean, and we'll push past that final good airstrip and float on down just past the 70th parallel. So you're way up there north. And just past the 70th parallel, 0.002, there's a little slough on the right. And if you can catch that, you can go save yourself about 300 yards of portaging. And then we portage the entire trip over to the next river over, what's called the Okpilak. And from there, we actually drag the boats upriver just a little bit so that we can ferry across and catch this one branch of the Okpilak, which will take us out to the part of the Arctic Ocean that is where we want to go, where there's a little barrier island that we can camp on and get picked up by planes. But there's a lot of ifs out there. You can do all of that and get out there to the Okpilak and there not be enough water to even float over there. So it's a real risky endeavor. And so, there's a bit of carrying, and sometimes you do that portage only to find that you need to continue portaging your stuff a little further. And it's otherworldly out there. There's this incredible optical illusion called Fata Morgana, after Morgan's castle in King Arthur's legend. And it's when you look out towards the pack ice, it looks like a wall of ice. The flat earthers would love it. It looks like a wall of ice 100 feet tall, and it's crenellated, and it's all, warped by the heat waves coming off of it. And it's because of an inversion layer where the air is actually colder closer to the ground, so the light bends to get to you. So objects farther away appear very tall. So it's bizarre. It looks real tall, and then as you paddle up to it, it's only, 3 feet tall. It's nothing to it at all. But it has this otherworldly feel to it, and the weather is powerful, and it's a challenging place. That's where the muskox love it too. I mean, they're built for that. So that's where they are usually. I'm hoping to see them in their Rastafarian glory. Here at the airport, they tend to be brushed and look like gerbils. But out there in the wild, they got 6-foot dreadlocks blowing in the wind, and they look like they belong there. So, yeah, from there, hopefully we'll have an extra day to hang out and explore that beach and all this driftwood that comes blowing out of the Mackenzie and lands on that beach, and all the flotsam and whale bones. And then hopefully we'll get picked up by the same planes and ferried over to the coastal town of Kaktovik. And if we have any time there, we'd like to walk down to the dump where they haul out the whales. And the place has these incredible, graveyard of whale bones, and sometimes there's polar bears there. That's a very spooky place. The ground is sticky with, rotten whale blubber, and there's dogs on chains barking at you, and baleen lying around just for no reason, and sunken ships and mist, and it's just a very bizarre place. So yeah, that's the end of the world as far as I know, and I'm hoping to see it one more time.
That's the voice of Clint Fries. He's talking about his upcoming Hulahula expedition to, hopefully, the Arctic Ocean. And I just came off the Hulahula. My experience was a little bit different because we had some obstacles in the river. And when I say obstacles, I'm actually talking about ice. So, Clint, I'm wondering if you could tell us about the ice and maybe explain to the listeners why I might have not been able to go downstream and why you're going to be a little bit cautious once you hit the tundra, because there's a few different spots that, as of, I think, today, are still frozen.
Yeah, definitely can keep you up at night thinking about the ice there. And when we say ice, we're actually talking about a kind of ice that's called off ice, and it's a river ice that is built up over the course of the winter. It's not just the frozen river, but there's springs that are coming all year. And so it flows along and freezes over, and then it busts out on the top and then freezes over again, and it busts out on the top and freezes over again. And it gradually just builds up over the course of the winter till you get this 3 or 4 meter tall slab of ice, which can be, in that one spot, it's 4 square miles. And then it takes a while, even after the river breaks up. It's a violent thing, and even though the river's moving pretty slowly through there, it has a scary feel to it because the river tends to melt out underneath the ice and leave these big overhanging shelves on the sides, which of course you can't stop, you can't get out, you can't do very much. And on a warm day, they're breaking off and hitting the water like really flat, and sounds like a shotgun. And then for a while, the river has these big slabs of ice in it, which is exciting too. So the fear is that you're going to, make a choice and end up in a spot where you couldn't see around the corner, and then all at once you're going to be out of options, and the river will go through some kind of an ice bridge or a sieve or an ice dam. And, hopefully it's an ice dam, because then it all backs up into like a lake, and you can sort of figure out what you're doing, and you can usually portage around the side. Sometimes the river itself will get bumped out of the river corridor. If it gets dammed like that, it'll back up, spill out over the river corridor, run along the tundra for a little while, which is an incredible feeling in a raft. You're looking down this crystal clear water at the wildflowers that you've been walking on, and they're underwater as you're cruising along. Very cool. And it's a little bit rapidy because the tundra is so bumpy. It's a very strange thing. And then you'll see a little bit of a horizon line as it dumps back in over the cut bank back into the river corridor. And that's kind of alarming, but usually you get up there, you're going 0.5 mile an hour, and it's 6 inches deep, and you can just step out and stop the boat and, ease it down there. So it's not actually that big a deal. It generally, in my experience, but I have heard stories of times when it was a big deal. So, I'm prepared for that. And, prepared too, also, it may not be runnable this time. We may have to make a safety call and not go through there. We'll get the best intelligence we can from the pilots and see if it's cracked open by the time we get down there. We have some options to get out earlier if we have to, but we sure want to give it a go, even if it takes a bunch of extra effort. Everybody loves the ice, and we love to get out and stop on it and walk around, and there's these little blue sluice runs, these rivulets of water coming over the top as they dump back onto the gravel bar. They deposit these piles of silt and glacial flour, and they build these little drizzle castles everywhere on all the gravel bars. And then as they melt out and they're gone, all that's left is these strange drizzle castles all over the gravel bars, and it looks like the place is populated by giant ants or something. So that's kind of nice, and sometimes we try to serve lunch right there at that spot to relish it a little bit. Usually once we're on the other side of it, because then we can actually enjoy our meal. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that part of it. And it may involve some portaging too, which I'm game for. Sometimes we can just put a rope on the boat and float it through these little ice canyons that you wouldn't really want to commit to with your life, but you would go ahead and commit a rubber raft to. So, yeah.
Can we talk about some of the other creatures that are there, including mosquitoes? We talk about hopefully getting out to the coast. And while you're walking around and exploring that beach with the driftwood, there's another critter there sometimes. big white bear. So I was just wondering if we could talk about from the smallest, those mosquitoes, how much of a role they play in your experience, and then what it's like to actually be guiding in an ecosystem where you're not the top of the food chain.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I really like, I say that, I don't want to be eaten by a bear, but I think it's way more natural existence to not be on the top of the food chain. I think it's kind of a bizarre thing to be above it. I'm not sure that we are emotionally equipped to handle it, to be stewards. So it seems better if we had some checks and balances on our actions. So I like the idea of being in bear country. I feel pretty comfortable. I've had pretty good luck. I've been charged a good many times and scared to death about it, but I've had, really good luck with it. It seems like all the charges I've experienced have been bluffs, and, they just want to check you out. And sometimes up there, they don't have a lot of experience with people, and we just smell really weird, and everything is on the menu for them until they get close enough to see that we're not what they thought. So they kind of need to come barreling in and check it out. And then usually if there's enough of us there and we smell weird enough and we're making weird noise, they are not comfortable enough and they will take off. That's what I've experienced there. I have never seen a polar bear. I've seen their tracks there and have been very wary of them. Other guides have seen them. I know that they're there. The only time that I think would be likely that we would see them is if, say, they pulled up a bowhead whale and all the bears were chewing on it and they missed the ice. Sometimes they're supposed to be going out with the ice in June to hunt seals, and that's their main deal. But sometimes if they hang around and eat on a whale through June, they'll miss the boat and not want to swim it, and they'll stay on land through the summer and become a real problem for people there in Kaktovik. The mosquitoes, they can be incredibly bad. They really can. And it's not that you get actually bit that often. It's more psychological, and I've gotten used to it. I've been doing it a long time, but to create a sense of well-being for the guests and keep morale high when it's just this oppressive, the word for it they use up here is bug pressure. And I like that word a lot because it's not really about them biting. We're pretty prepared. We're pretty covered. We have head nets and all that. But there's just this pressure, when there's that many of them, and you just feel like, oh man, can't do anything. There's so many of them. I don't want to open my tent door. I don't want to go to the bathroom. But largely on this trip, we get away with it because of the timing of the trip. We're generally before most of the bugs, and it's generally breezy enough that they're not too prevalent. As it gets into July, it's rolling the dice. They can be pretty dang bad, especially out there on the plain, which is where we are at the end. They're incredible on their own, and they can break you down mentally. So if you ever watch those reality shows, you'll know it's never the big predators that get them. It's always the bugs. I'm hoping to see a variety of wildlife up there. I'd love to see the muskox and maybe a wolverine or some wolves or some pups, and definitely the caribou. The caribou are so special, I think the best wildlife trip I've ever been on, we saw close to 40,000 caribou on the trip, and it was just stunning. You could just sit there and watch groups of 5,000 or 6,000 caribou just go by. And it was mostly mamas and calves, They're talking to each other the whole time, hemming and hawing, and their legs are snapping. They got these tendons in their legs that make this weird little snapping sound, and they're communicating. Mama and daughters and sons are communicating to stay in contact the whole time. And sometimes there's babies that get lost from their mamas, and they're cruising around like a free meal, coming to us to ask for directions. And of course, we don't know where to send them. I've seen caribou cross the river right in front of camp and rap on a rock in the middle of the river, or I've seen them come barreling into camp in four-wheel evasion mode with a wolf right on their heels. Such a cool place, such a cool thing. The caribou are a really special animal. They have such a difficult existence in dealing with the bot flies and the warble flies and that heat and all those predators, and they just make it happen up there in that incredibly difficult place. And these people that we're going to be seeing in Arctic Village, they're the caribou people, and they have a real relationship with them still. And they're the center of resistance to extraction on the North Slope, the Gwich'in people. And so whenever the senators come up and visit and want to learn about it or talk about it or have a powwow, that happens right there in Arctic Village because that's the center of the Gwich'in. They don't really receive oil revenues like the natives on the coast do. So they're against a lot of extraction, whereas the folks on the coast are more split about it. So very cool. We get to see both on this trip.
I'm sitting next to Clint Fries. Tomorrow he's flying into the Hulahula River in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And after that, you're going to be heading to the Alsec. And that's a very different river. I'd like to jump into that if you don't mind talking about the Alsec.
Sure.
And honoring the Alsec.
Yeah, honoring the Alsec, that's the way to speak about it. Often we just call it the mighty Alsec. In boaters' minds, it has a special place, largely just because it's so big in such a vast setting. I mean, it's oceanic at the end. We run out of words to talk about it in terms of its size, but it starts off small. We get to start up near the top, and it starts off pretty small, and it's a struggle to make it through that first day until you start to get to some gradient where another bigger river comes in, the Kaskawolsh. We start up in Haines Junction, which is in the Yukon, and we make our way into BC, British Columbia, and then we make our way back into Alaska in 13 days. And it's an incredible trip. The river gets bigger. Some people say it doubles in size every day, which is more or less accurate. And the beginning few days is just getting down to Lowell Lake, and it picks up speed, and it's cruising along at 8 or 10 miles per hour, and it's silty gray, and the rocks in there are silty gray, and they're kind of sharp, and you got to be on your toes. And there's beautiful creeks dumping in from the sides. It's one of the densest habitats of bears in North America. There's just a lot of grizzly bears there. So some of the campsites are closed just because they're on bear trails, and we have to fill out detailed bear reports for any encounters and stuff. They're trying to keep a good census. But there are a lot of bears there, and it's Canada, so we don't get to bring firearms, which changes the tone of the trip a little bit when all you've got is a little bear horn and some bear spray, and you're on the menu. And I think it kind of puts us in our place. Everything about that trip puts us in our place. Feel very, very small. There's not a lot of other trips out on the water. You might pass one or two other groups in the 2 weeks, so you feel like you're out there in the true wilderness. Is hundreds of miles in any direction before there's human habitation. And you get into Lowell Lake. The last time I pulled into Lowell Lake was exciting. We stopped up above and gathered a little firewood, and we stopped at another place and we gathered some clear water, and we pulled up onto this little knoll to look down into the lake because it's kind of tricky. You want to not go out into the main body of lake that's full of icebergs, and you might have to work really hard to get back to the place where you can camp along the left. You want to take as early a left as you possibly can, but every year it's a little different how the lake breaks up. And we were up on that knoll looking down, and the lake was way more full of ice than I had seen in a long time, but there was a channel to the left and it looked like it was going to be good. So we headed off, and I saw the left coming up, and I was setting up to pull towards it, and I saw two ravens on a little branch that was washed up on the island that divided the main lake from this left-hand turn. And then at the bottom of this bramble, there was this weird-looking lump, and then the lump stood up, and it turned out to be a bear. And he was very surprised to see us coming around the corner, and he was chewing on a dead young moose that was half submerged. So maybe sort of staying fresh and icy cold, this moose carcass. And so the bear went taking off. I was pulling as hard as I could and went left. And then we ended up having to push some icebergs to the side, just little bergy bits, for a good ways, third of a mile or so, to get to where we wanted to camp. And it was beautiful. We were kind of the icebreaker trip in June last year. So yeah, there's a fantastic, just incredible, my favorite hike up there, Goatherd Mountain. It's this ribbon of rock, this metamorphic, crazy, looks like marbled bacon rock that gets you up so you can overlook the lake and Lowell Glacier and these big peaks in the background. That whole trip, we had 13 days of sun, which was just outrageous. I think it was because I had bought these very expensive rain pants before the trip. But yeah, so the following day you row through the lake, which can be very difficult. It can be actually sometimes prohibitive. Sometimes you can't get across the lake. It can be 2.5-foot whitecaps coming across. And so sometimes you've got to wait till the next day, or you've got to go in the middle of the night, or do all kinds of crazy things. Drag your boats. We've tie them together and drag them with dry suits on. All kinds of things to get through that lake. And hopefully you do it gracefully enough that you're not exhausted, because on the other side is the big rapid of the trip, Lava North. And always a little bit worried about grabbing the Scout for that. You worry that it's going to have change because the river changes so much. You come around that corner and you're like, oh, good, there is a place to stop. And you pull over and go take a look at it and make a plan. And it's one of those rapids that from either shore, it looks horrific. It looks like, it's going to be tight and huge, and I'm not certain of how it's going to go. And then once you go through it a few times, you know that actually once you get out there, there's sort of a super highway going down the middle. Between the two big holes is actually probably 40 feet wide of a good run, but it doesn't look that way from the side. So anyway, we suit up, dry suits, and do another little safety talk, a kind of very, very scary one at that point, and get on through that rapid. And half an hour later, we're at the Blue Lagoon, peeling out of our suits, having a picnic lunch, and knowing that we, for another year, have made it below that thing. And there's really no more big rapids on the trip. There's plenty of other excitement, but no more big rapids, really. So yeah, from there you can just go down around the corner and camp at this incredible place called Wolverine Camp. And that's right in the middle of kind of another little rapid, and it's a sweet little spot you can pull out. And cliff walls are just really lit up. They're kind of gold colored, so they catch that evening alpenglow that's pretty prevalent there. And yeah, days and days more. It just keeps going, We don't do as much hiking on that trip as we do up in the Arctic because it's so wooded. But there was a new rapid there last year just downstream from that. It kind of blew open, and we weren't sure how that was going to go. I was worried about it. It turned out to be just fine. Yeah, so we get down to Blackadar Camp, or that's sort of gone now, but just above there. And we pull over and camp, and usually we walk up to the glacier. It's a great close walk to a glacier. You can get on there, and there's these huge broken blocks and little ice caves and stuff to explore. And the next day, the helicopter comes in early in the morning and transports our gear and ourselves through Turnback Canyon, a Class 6 unnavigable canyon, and puts us down on the other side, and we're pumping up boats, and by noon, we're usually back on the water. And it has a very different feel. When you put down on that other side, it's like you've crossed the divide, and it's wet, and it seems to be warmer, and it's lush over there, and the river is huge and pretty flat for the rest of the way. And we get down to Confluence Camp, some incredible hiking. The wildflowers are just booming. The hills if the right time of year, the hills are just purple with dwarf fireweed everywhere. And I got this great picture last year of a dead eagle on a gravel bar, just with, purple firewood behind it, and then the glaciers behind that. It's just a stunning place, and constantly can't believe that there's nobody else there. I mean, it's Grand Canyon jaw-droppingly beautiful, and there's nobody there because it's just so difficult to get there. And the chance of the weather being bad is high. So yeah, from there we float on down to Walker Glacier, and we try to get out and walk around on that glacier. And another day down to the big lake, Alsec Lake, and which has its own challenges as far as getting into the lake. That seems to be a tricky moment. Most of the river goes through a sieve of icebergs, so you've got to make sure you don't go through that. And some days it's open and you can go right through, but most of the time you've got to find a way through what we call door number 3 or door number 2 and not go through that. And then we camp right there on the backside of this knob that sticks out in the lake. And we'll spend a couple days there on a short hike and looking down at this lake. It's full of big icebergs. These icebergs can be 100 feet tall, and they melt more on the bottom than the top, so after a while they'll just roll over and show you their shiny underbelly. And there's seals and stuff in there, and dolphins, and it's a pretty amazing place to be. A short run the next day out to the takeout where we're picked up in Bush Plains and flown out to Yakutat, where you can actually get on an Alaska Airlines flight to Juneau, which is pretty amazing. So the trip works pretty smoothly, but there's a lot of logistics, and it's a real journey. A lot of miles covered. That river's moving, so you see a lot of country and not a lot of people. And it's a special one for me. I remember, the first time seeing that amount of water, and really every time I see it, coming around the corner at Walker and getting that feel of just being on an ocean. It's powerful. Yeah.
Well, it's the voice of Clint Fries, and he's talking about the Alsec River, and that river goes through the middle of the world's largest nonpolar ice cap from Canada to the United States, and it's quite a journey. Why does the wind blow so much more up here? The ice?
That's interesting. I'm not a meteorologist, so I'm not sure, as far as I go with a diabatic winds and all that, things rushing in and rushing out as it heats up and cools down. That's about as much as I know about it. It's a dance, that we try to dance with, trying to get off the beach as soon as we can in the morning because it seems to build up in the afternoon. We try that. Sometimes it doesn't work and it's just blowing all the time. It's a trade-off though too, because sometimes if the wind dies, that's when the bugs are out. And honestly, I would take the wind, most of the time. There are times on that river where my hands have just been bleeding from rowing against the wind. Like there's times when you can do it physically, but you're damaging yourself to get there. One time we went through door number 1 and we struggled to get through. A pilot above us had told us that there was a clear path, but it was less clear from the ground, of course. And when we eventually made it through these 100-foot icebergs and popped out into the lake, that's when we realized that it was actually quite windy and the wind was the wrong way. And we were 4 miles across this lake from where we wanted to be. So things like that. And then the first day of the trip is the other wind challenge. There's an incredibly difficult windy section up there. If you catch it on the wrong day, you just can't. You're going to have to just pull over and wait with no real knowledge of when it's going to let up. And that's another thing about these expedition trips, which I love, and I think is with their greatest challenge, is that they're just not that predictable. We just don't know. We know what day 1 is going to look like for the most part, and we know what the last day is going to look like. And in between, we're just doing the best we can to work with nature along the way and see if she's going to let us through.
Beautiful. Clint, I just started my career on that river a few years ago, and I'm wondering if you could share advice with me and river guides who are going to be making their way to guide on the Alsec and the Hulahula up here. I know they're 2 different rivers, completely different from each other, but some advice that you might share with a guide who's coming up here and learning about this.
Nice. Yeah. I feel like I didn't learn enough initially about the flowers and the birds and the geology, and I wish I had studied that. I learned it over time because I was fortunate enough to get year after year of these trips. But I wish I had been a better naturalist early on and sort of embraced that more, because people love it. They just love it, and that's part of what they're here for. And so I would embrace that. And I think also any guide that ends up in a situation where they're on one of these trips is probably going to already have this in their bag. But being able to problem solve on the fly, ready to adapt to plan B and C and D, and working with pilots and letting them be in charge of those days, trusting them, asking them lots of questions. They know everything up there. The pilots are an incredible resource, and they love to talk. So use that time that you're in the air to learn everything you can about the culture even up there and how they're tolerating the white folks coming and going and the tourism and all of it. There's a lot of dynamics going on up there. Usually on the Hulahula every year, there's a powwow kind of thing going on the side of the river up there at Grassers, where the chief of Kaktovik gets together with a bunch of other chiefs and they talk about stuff. And I ended up sitting next to the chief one day on the plane. You just never know who you're going to end up sitting next to. And the people up here are wonderful and open, and they love to talk, and they're a great resource.
All right, Clint, any life advice that you would share with people? Maybe many of the people listening are not actually river guides, but some advice on life. You've lived a pretty rich one.
Nice. Well, I'll tell you what I'm really interested in right now, and I know you and I talked about this earlier, was using the wilderness as medicine for yourself. So what I mean by that is trying to keep your circadian rhythm, like being as connected as possible to the landscape that you're in. And of course that's tricky in Alaska, where it's just sunny all the time, in the Arctic especially, but you can still do it. And then that means taking your shoes off on the gravel bar and on the sandbar and walking through the creek as much as you can, dunking your face in the creek, and treat that sunshine and that clean water and that view, that long view of pure wilderness, as medicine for you. That's my goal on this trip. And then I also think one piece of advice that I've passed out a few times over the years is that I have always tried really hard to please the clients, right? That's our goal, is make sure they have a great time. But ultimately, as a professional, what's even more important than that is my relationship with the landscape, my relationship with the river, And so take that time to foster that, When you're not needed every second, you can go sit with your feet in the water or staring off at the glacier or whatever it is, to give that to yourself, tip yourself, because those guys, they're going to be gone next week. You might never hear from them again. Whether they enjoyed the salad and the pasta, it's not going to matter. But your relationship with the land and your commitment to the land as a steward is what is the most valuable. And you can foster that in yourself, and you can foster that in your co-guides. It's very sustaining, that is.
Clint, thank you so much for taking the time and energy to join me here today on the Trail Less Traveled.
Such a pleasure, Mandela. Thank you so much. I'm really honored.
Hello, my name is Kellen Beck, and I am the Development Director at the Montana Natural History Center. Our mission is to promote and cultivate the appreciation, understanding, and stewardship of nature through education. My naturalist tip of the week is the chickadee brain swap. Montana's beloved black-capped chickadees do something amazing. Each fall, they replace old brain cells with new ones to help remember where they stored the food all season. This seasonal neurogenesis means their brains grow larger in the winter, just when they need the memory boost most to survive the cold. For more information and to become a member of the Montana Natural History Center, visit montananaturalist.org. That's montananaturalist.org.
That's it for this week's adventure, my friends in Missoula and around the world. But until next week, please remember, conservation is not a spectator sport. Living in Missoula is a privilege. With privilege comes responsibility. Please get educated and engaged. Speak up on behalf of wildlife and wild places. And if you think you're too small to make a difference, well then you've never spent the night with a mosquito.